The reason I came to Los Alamos actually goes back to about 1930. At that time, I was a graduate student in physics, University of California, and my boss, Professor Leonard Lubb, suggested that I join the Naval Reserve as an engineering officer. I'd always been interested in machinery and big steam machinery, so I thought that was a good idea, and I did. And from that rather casual decision back, let's say, about 1929 or 30, eventually followed a train of events which got me to Los Alamos. I got my degree in physics, went to teach physics at Stanford University, and then when the war came on, or shortly before, I found this old Naval Reserve Commission coming back to call me up. Having been in the Naval Reserve for 10 years then, I couldn't see any good reason for not going on with the problem. So I said, yes, I'm ready. When do I go and where do I go? And I was assigned as an ordnance research officer to the Naval Proving Ground at Dolgan, Virginia, where, believe it or not, there was my old friend Leonard Lubb. I spent the first 3 years of the war there until 1944, and in the course of that I worked for a man by the name of Deke Parsons, then Captain Parsons. And one day in the spring of 44, I think it was, or thereabouts, he sort of disappeared from the proving ground, and nobody would say where he went. There were rumors of some project that a lot of physicists were working on somewhere, but no one knew much about it. In fact, no one knew anything about it. And there was some speculation that perhaps that Captain Parsons had joined that project. Well, a little later in the spring, early summer, I was taking my first leave of my family out in California when I got a frantic telegram from the Bureau of Naval Personnel, which said, your leave is canceled. Report to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where you will be met. At Albuquerque, I was met by my old friend, Admiral Parsons, then my Commodore. And we started out the 100-mile drive to Los Alamos, and at that time I got the first clue as to what was going on here. It was a very pleasant trip. It reminded me of my home in California, nice, beautiful desert country, and I'd seen about all I wanted to of the green fields and hills of Virginia. And so when Parsons said that he wanted me to come here, be assigned here, and help George Kistiakowsky in the operation of what was then called the Explosives Division, I was in no position to argue much anyway, and except for a slight fleeting thought that crossed my mind more than once, that once I got there I'd never get away. In about a month, I'd packed up my affairs at Dahlgren and driven across the country with my family and turned up at what was then sometimes thought of as a concentration camp, a place called Project Y. It was Los Alamos, but all that anybody knew was Project Y. First impressions of the place were a little extraordinary. There were a series of old green buildings made of fiberboard, 2-story high, lining a narrow road surrounded by a fence. In the general vicinity of these buildings were barracks, some little prefab sort of huts that had been brought down from Hanford, and a considerable number of rather bleak but very efficient 4-family apartments. And in addition to that housing, there was a place called Bathtub Row. Bathtub Row was all that was left at that point, almost all that was left, of the days of Los Alamos Ranch School, because up until 1942, Los Alamos had been the site of a boys' school. big house, which was one of the boys' dormitories, a nice stone log building, a beautiful building called Fuller Lodge, and 3 or 4 stone buildings that were classrooms and housing for the masters, and a big log building where Parsons himself at that time lived. But it was a rather extraordinary place to come to. We worked 6 days a week, very busy. The group of people which had been gathered here by Oppenheimer was the most extraordinary group of people. I met all the physicists I'd read about and read their papers for the last 15 years in the flesh. There they were working. There were about as many GIs as there were civilians at work. The GIs were a very stage of academic career. Some had PhDs and were sergeants. Some were the 2-year engineering wonders who had been snatched from their college careers and given a quick course in physics or chemistry or engineering and sent to work in technical pursuits. But I say the extraordinary thing about it was the way in which this strange group of people worked together. I won't say without friction, but I will say with extraordinary harmony. I mentioned that the laboratory worked with extraordinary unanimity, extraordinary harmony, and I think there is one man who should be given the entire credit for the way in which the laboratory was able to function. A lesser man couldn't have done it, and a man only the greatness of Robert Oppenheimer, it seems to me, could have really carried this out. Absolutely extraordinary man, totally dedicated to his task. He knew a great deal about everything. You could come to him on almost any subject in physics, mathematics, very shortly, any subject in explosives, hydrodynamics. Oppie knew what you were talking about, had a useful comment, had a useful opinion, could make a wise decision. Always willing to listen to anyone. Believe me, among a group of military and a group of civilians and scientists, there were people that took a lot of listening too. Some because they had something important to say, and sometimes because their feelings were hurt about something. Oppie navigated this difficult group of people, these difficult problems with extraordinary skill. And with practical unanimity, he was the leader. He was the boss. It was Oppie's project. Later on, of course, in the hearings about having to do with his clearance, he was criticized by some for disloyalty. I myself, knowing him here at Los Alamos during the war years, cannot believe that there could be a man more dedicated, more honest, more devoted to his country, more devoted to getting this task done rapidly and done well. I myself will never doubt his personal loyalty, his personal integrity, and I will never cease to regret the fact that his loyalty had to be called into question, his clearance canceled during those unhappy hearings. Everyone was always glad that later on, the fact that this was a mistake was recognized by the country when Oppie received the Fermi Award. Life at Los Alamos during those war years was very exciting. It had its frustrations. One of the major frustrations was probably due to the fact that the existence of Los Alamos was classified. The fact that one was at Los Alamos was classified. We didn't exist at all. For example, all incoming mail was opened and read to make sure that nothing wrong was coming into anyone. All outgoing mail was put into the post office so-called, unsealed, where it was read by the censor. The censor thought it was all right. He sealed it, or she sealed it, and it was sent out through the normal U.S. mails. But the fact the mail was censored was itself classified. And so if the censor didn't like what you said, he simply sent the letter back to you and left you to guess what you had done wrong. But you got used to it, and nowadays those envelopes with the seal by the censor are philatelic curiosities and very, very rare. At the time, they were something of a humorous curse. Another problem, of course, those were the days of gas rationing. We had about enough gasoline per family car to make one trip to Santa Fe a month. Naturally, people got together, and one was able to get there perhaps twice a month. But it was forbidden, and people obeyed this, to go farther away than Santa Fe unless there was some domestic crisis that required one's presence somewhere else, in which case permission had to be obtained. Santa Fe was very relaxed about the existence of this secret project on the hill. It had various rumors. One that it was a submarine base connected by a long tunnel to the Pacific Ocean. Also was a home for, let's say, wayward wax. But the residents of the state of New Mexico were very much to be commended for their lack of curiosity about what was happening up here. Clearly it was classified. There was a fence around it. There were guard gates. Had to have a pass. But no one was really very curious, and no one tried to pry. It's hard to, I say, to recapture all its facets. One of the extraordinary things about it was the way in which very famous people lived together. Perhaps at one time or another, more Nobel laureates came by Los Alamos than have ever come by any similar place in the course of time. Almost every physics department of any consequence in the United States, or chemistry department these days, has an alumnus, or has several alumni of Los Alamos. Lawrence was a frequent visitor here, and his enthusiasm, his energy, his absolute dedication to the project, which started at the Rad Lab in Berkeley, was infectious for anyone who knew him. Fermi, of course, was an absolutely wonderful man. There was no subject in physics which he couldn't think about and explain. Sometimes his explanations were so simple and so obvious that while one listened to them, they went down very easily. You think, now I understand that perfectly. A little later on, when you try to recapture that proof or that theorem, it wasn't quite as simple as it had seemed when Fermi himself was talking about it. But an absolutely wonderful man. His guidance, his help, his ideas, his intuition was beyond belief. Frisch was here, famous besides for his physics, for his ability to play the piano. And Segre, the great names of physics, were here at Los Alamos, some as residents, some as visitors. Bohr himself came occasionally. And all of these were very exciting to a young physicist and to the younger people who were here. The technical job which the laboratory had to do between the middle of 1943 and just as soon thereafter as it could possibly be accomplished, best described as to see if an atomic bomb could be made, and if it could be made, make one. Very early in the game, after sort of the basic physics had been worked out at the Met Lab and a lot of university laboratories around the country, began looking increasingly probable that there was nothing in nature that said that you couldn't make a nuclear explosion. That is, say, you couldn't release an enormous amount of nuclear energy very rapidly and have an extraordinary explosion of a different magnitude than any had been ever seen before. Nevertheless, one was dealing with a regime of temperature and pressure had never been seen on the surface of the Earth, and it was always, of course, possible that somewhere there was a phenomenon or an effect which had been overlooked. There seem to be two ways to go about getting this nuclear explosion. The most commonplace one was what we then called the gun type of assembly, where one simply brought two subcritical pieces of fission material together fast enough and under suitable conditions so the explosion would result. But in the course of working on that particular method of attack on the problem, another idea turned up at the laboratory, that it might be possible to assemble material by explosive means in a spherical geometry. And if this were the case, then there would be certain gains in, let's say, efficiency and in possibly even in practicability. So both of these ways of going about the problem were under active exploration by the time I came to Los Alamos. It was the increased emphasis that Oppenheimer wished to place, and Kinsey wanted to place upon the implosion type of assembly, that I think was probably directly responsible for my being assigned to that type of activity. Nevertheless, both of these things were pursued with equal vigor, and there was almost a race between the availability of the material and the availability of the necessary professional technical skills, physics skills, explosive skills, to make either one or the other type of device. Actually, this is now history, of course, both the task of the gun type device and the implosion type device were completed about the same time, and it was decided to make a test near Alamogordo, called the Trinity site, of the implosion system. There was good reason for doing this. If there was anything wrong, time to find out about it was now rather than heat of battle. Secondly, the implosion system was the most technically complicated. If it worked, it would test two things at once. It would test this fundamental concern that I mentioned a moment ago: can you or can you not make any atomic bomb? And if we could, then had we made the implosion system sufficiently precise and its associated gadgetry sufficiently good that indeed we had a useful nuclear weapon. As everyone knows, the test was a great technical success. The behavior of the device was well within the range of predictions. It's quite a large range, but rather at the upper end of those predictions. It was a frightening thing to see, in a sense. To me, the brilliance of the light which accompanied the explosion was something that one had no prior experience in seeing. Absolutely amazing. We were far enough away, at least I was, so the noise, the sound, the explosive bang was not particularly unusual. One had heard that before. But the brilliant and long-lasting light was something that had never before been seen. Many people have since claimed to have had very deep thoughts, and I sometimes get asked, did you have any great deep thoughts about this subject at that particular instant? And I'm afraid the answer must be no, I did not. We had worked very hard for the preceding several days. Many of us had worked very hard for the preceding several years. And this was a technical achievement of the highest order. And I think probably for most of us, our thoughts were more lines, well, gee whiz, it worked. And there was a sort of a professional triumph here, with little thought for what one had really done in connection with the history of the world and the history of warfare. Nevertheless, those thoughts, of course, came very soon afterwards. because the question then was being faced already: if the Alamogordo test is successful, will the device be used in Japan in connection with the war? And of course, having proved that nuclear explosions can take place, both types of device were then available for use. And at the highest levels, it was decided that this would indeed be done. It's my own very strong opinion that this was a correct decision, although I know that many people have had second thoughts about it, or feelings of guilt, or whatever you wish. Nevertheless, it has to be remembered, I believe, quite aside from the American lives that were probably saved by avoiding an invasion, not being how sure the occasional rumors that a peace had been negotiated. Nonetheless, I think it has to be remembered that nuclear fission was known then and known before the war around the world. It was known that Hitler had considered the possibility of making an atomic bomb in his country. The Russians certainly knew about it. The British knew about it. If we had not made the bomb, someone else would have. I would, for many, many reasons, prefer that this country have done it. After the war came to a close, Los Alamos went into a rather strange period of interregnum. A number of us believe very strongly that the things that we had not done, and the avenues of research and development that have been opened up, would now have to be undertaken. That the world, having seen an atomic bomb, having known it was now possible, would certainly in several countries undertake to do it themselves. It was not possible, although an attempt was made to see if one couldn't get nuclear accord in 1945-46, but it failed. I would say, of course, because that was perhaps too much to ask of human nature. Perhaps the most important thing that the atomic bomb had opened up was the possibility of making a fusion bomb, because now one had on the surface of the Earth those conditions of temperature and pressure which are necessary to make the fusion reaction, the reaction between very light elements, take place. And this was simply now a possibility, and it would have to be looked at it. If we didn't, someone else certainly would. Most of our first attempts were theoretical attempts, led us into blind alleys. It didn't work, or it didn't work well, and seemed to be pretty cumbersome and effective. But eventually, if smart people work on a problem long enough, and if it's within the realm of nature, they'll find their way through it. Edward Teller and Stan Ulam, supplemented by I don't know how many coffee table discussions and laboratory discussions and experiments, came up with a way that looked feasible to make a thermonuclear explosion, to make the hydrogen bomb or the fusion bomb possible. And so we devoted then almost the entire energy of the laboratory along that particular line, and were successful in the Mike shot. Mike shot marked both the end of an era and the beginning of a new one in the laboratory's goals and programs. It was a triumphant technical success. It showed that we had a long ways to go in making adaptations of thermonuclear devices for military purposes, but it also showed that we could begin to look more widely for other programs that the laboratory could conduct which were of national need, or national interest, or national benefit. We had various reasons for doing this. One of the important ones was that, in contrast with almost every other field of human endeavor, which I am aware, the atomic bomb business seeks to put itself out of business. Our one objective, Los Alamos, has always been that bombs never get used, that the United States was always ahead both in technology and a willingness to discuss the abandonment of nuclear warfare. And we still hoped in the 50s, as we still hoped in the 60s and hope in the 70s, that someday the atomic bomb and the fusion bomb and all weapons of that sort of mass destruction will be things of the past. At the same time, we look for other areas of opportunity. Things that occur to one quickly, we can play a role in ecological studies. Some of the things that we've been doing in nuclear weaponry and nuclear testing are directly applicable to the study of pollution. Basic research will always be necessary. Graduate education in physics, chemistry, mathematics, computers, metallurgy, you name it, this can be done at Los Alamos. And I think one of the great roles the next 10 or 20 years will be a role in graduate education, not for just one university, but for many universities. The last 25 years have been fun, mostly. There have been troubles. The budget reared its ugly head more and more in the last 5 or 10. That's, I think, been the worst problem, but it's a real one. It's one that one has to expect. We just had it too good directly after the war. I've enjoyed my career here. It's my home, and I propose to continue to live here. On the other hand, I'm glad to leave some of these problems, many of them, to my successor, Harold Agnew. He will have fun solving them as well. There's only one thing that I hope very much. The atomic bomb is now 25 years old. The countries of the world have not yet found any clear way to abolish nuclear warfare. Small steps have been made. Test ban treaties, seabed treaty, non-proliferation treaties, the current SALT talks are all steps in the right direction. They're all steps which tell people that the people of the world are worried about nuclear weapons. If I had one hope, and I have it very strongly, is the next 25 years don't go by without really having accomplished the goal of the first 25, namely to abolish nuclear warfare.